And we are live once again. It's Monday night at 7:30, and the live stream, the Sound Advice live stream and podcast is back. I am Justin, also known as the DIY audio guy. I am here with my usual partner in crime, Nick from Toyd's DIY Audio, aka the one and only Toyd. How you been, man?
Good. I actually just got a notification on my phone to say watch live now, DIY audio guy, audio Q&A.
Hopefully the notification goes out and people will pop in and say hi.
So we decided to do another Q&A. We just did one not too long ago. Actually, was it last week that we did one?
It may have been last week.
Or like two
last
weeks
time
ago.
we were on. Yeah.
Last time
yeah.
Here's the deal. We've been wanting to do these more, I think, because you guys have seemingly really grabbed a hold of that and have enjoyed asking us questions, and we've enjoyed answering them to the best of our ability. So I think we're going to probably do more of these, right?
Yeah. I think that when people ask questions and keep asking questions, that's a sign we should probably try to answer them. So that's always fun.
And when we can't get to all the answers in one live stream, then we know that you should come back and ask that question again. Unfortunately, I can't remember all the questions, so you got to ask them again.
We'll try to star comments if there's a question or something like that. And when I'm scanning through the chat, it's hard to know for sure who has a question. So maybe if you do something like you can, of course, the obvious thing to do is do a super chat, because we don't miss those. We always say hi to people who give a super chat. But if you have a question for us, you can maybe start off with the word question or something like, or question for Nick or question for Justin. Nick, I've got a question for you to start us off.
Okay.
Do you have any experience with thermal cameras?
A little. I wouldn't say a lot. I've used a couple, but I've used them mainly to find leaks in the house, as far as where am I getting a cold leak from? How can I shut that off? So not really with electronics.
So I recently acquired one of these, and I see a few opportunities to use this as a diagnostic tool for audio stuff. And we'll just have to see how that goes. And I see if I can find this picture. Here it is. I've already started doing some diagnosing. And so it will be interesting. That is a car audio fuse holder that is having a bad day.
So I had a bad day.
You're going to give us a copyright strike, man. You gotta cut that out.
Oh, trust me, if they heard my voice, we would not get a copyright strike on it. They'd be like, wow, that is, I mean, they might give me a strike, but not for copyright. So, I find those to be intriguing because you can do a lot with those, right? You can test amplifiers to see when they're getting hot. You can check out, of course, your speakers when they're running warm. There's a lot that you can do. I know Big D, for example, would take off the top of the amplifier and run it and then measure the heat, what was going on. I thought that was pretty cool.
We have a question. Nick, can you do a big three on the 09 328i? I'm guessing that's a BMW.
You know what? You're much better at answering a big three. This is really a Hi-Fi Vega question, really more than anything else.
Yeah. As far as I know, you can do a big three on any car. The challenge is doing the big three on the car, finding the places to make the connections. It's just really a matter of following the existing power and ground wires, really. It's a ground wire upgrade to the various sources. So the big three is from the battery to the frame, from the engine to the frame, and there's one more, and I'm all of a sudden blanking on it. And I've done a big three. I did one in my truck last year, and BMWs, I imagine, are very hard to work with or work on. And so I personally wouldn't touch a BMW as far as doing my own work on it. But my old beater pickup truck, it was really easy to do the big three, and got help from a friend. So yeah, you can do a big three on any car in theory. The problem is getting it done.
Yeah, I mean that's always the issue, and a lot of newer cars, just in general, it's just much harder to do upgrades
Alternator to
to
battery.
your.
Yeah, that's the other one. Yes. Yeah. I don't know why I forgot about that one. I think I may have said that one, but didn't count it. Right. And some people do a big four where they'll run from alternator to alternator ground. And so sometimes people, instead of grounding from the engine, get a new ground right from the alternator case right to the battery. And that's not a bad idea. It's again a BMW site to work on, like someone commented. But yeah, I mean, if you're worried about doing it yourself, don't be afraid to ask a shop to help out or ask a friend. Find someone who works on BMWs that might be able to give you a hand.
So I'm going to skip to Blake's comment, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Blake asks, hey, I'm hoping one of you all knows this, but when you add a second driver and everything is in phase, it adds 3 decibels. When 2 drivers are comb filtering really bad, it only is 1.5 decibel increase instead on average, ? So let's first clarify the first statement, because it's correct and not correct all at once. It is correct. Whenever you add a second driver, you get plus 3 decibels, but that's not really the end of the story, right? That's really the beginning of the story. We also have to take into account impedance. So when we add a second driver, our impedance changes. Now, when we're talking about adding a second driver, we're talking a second driver of the same. So the same second driver. Right. So we're talking, 2 mid-ranges that are the same, 2 subwoofers that are the same, 2 whatever.
And he's talking about comb filtering, so he's probably talking about a pair of mid-ranges, because you don't really have to worry about comb filtering with subwoofers because the wavelengths are so huge that 2 subwoofers nearby each other aren't going to comb filter too bad. I'm sure they will some, but not too
unless
bad.
Unless you're talking about a room and they're really far apart. But let's go back to the original assumption. So adding just one woofer gives you 3 decibels. By the way, I did a whole video on this. I show you the math and everything behind this. If we run those drivers in series, right, our impedance goes up, right? The way I look at it is like a World Series. Like if someone says, hey, the World Series is 3 games to 2, that means they've played a total of 5 games. We add them together. 3 plus 2 equals 5. They played 5 out of their 7 games. Now, in impedance, we do the same thing. So if it's a 4 ohm and a 4 ohm, we run it in series, we add those together. So we get a total of 8 ohms. Right. Now, when we run 8 ohms, we theoretically half the power.
Right. You have
so although we
of the power.
Half of the power we used to have from the same amplifier. So although we added a second driver and got plus 3 decibels, because we've halved the power, we've actually got negative 3 decibels. So running 2 subwoofers or 2 mid ranges in series gives you a net of 0 decibels, theoretically. So,
and again, if you run them in parallel, it gives you a net of 6 decibels theoretically, and that's where we're going next. Musical power. It's not real world dB. It's not. I don't know what it will be in the real world. We're talking about just looking at the math. I got a video on it where I show the math. Just looking at musical power. Now, does comb filtering reduce dB? Okay.
Let's explain real quick. Let's explain what we were just talking about. If we run it parallel, we have it. So if we had 2 4 ohms, then we go down to 2 ohms. Theoretically, we double our power.
Right.
So assuming the subwoofer can take double the power, then we would get a theoretical 6 decibels, 3 for adding the second woofer.
You got 2 subwoofers. Each can handle, one more sub. So yeah, it can handle double the power. Right.
Right. Now, when 2 drivers are comb filtering, that basically means when they're playing frequencies of the same, but they're having a negative interaction with each other. Right. It's only a 1.5 decibel on average. There's really, as far as I know, no great way to mathematically determine what that's going to be, because part of that has to do with the distance they are from each other and what they're actually doing to the frequencies and at what frequencies. At some frequencies, they probably won't be comb filtering at all. So we're still getting the plus 3 or whatever decibels. And at some, we're going to be getting significantly less. So it might be 1.5 on average. I don't know. But really, in general, just stay away from comb filtering as best as possible, because you really shouldn't need to. But I'm guessing Blake is asking this because
it's interesting.
We've been talking about stunt walls.
Yeah.
And stunt walls always have comb filtering. There's no great answer to what it's going to do, though.
I think about if you were to go like say to customspeakerpods.com and enter the code for the discount right down in the video description. They sell you the pods for the 2 6.5s, for example. You're going to get comb filtering with that. But then again, if you're the kind of person who wants to do two 6.5s, you're not that worried about the sound quality. You're trying to get loud. And I would think the extra cone area and the extra power is going to have overwhelm any losses in SPL due to comb filtering.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain degree, you're just going to have to fight it, and it's going to be what it's going to be because the comb filtering is going to change at every degree that you go off axis, right? So, he's saying on average 1.5 decibel increase. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know. I've never actually measured what the average is off axis, but in general, just try to avoid it if you can.
Would it be worthwhile for the people who don't know what comb filtering is to describe comb filtering?
Sure, if you want to, go ahead.
Sure. So it is what it sounds like. If you would imagine a comb. Now, I haven't used a comb in a very long time, so I'm not sure what combs look like. But if you can imagine, if you were to plot the frequency response of your speakers and you got these peaks and dips, as the frequency rises and falls, such that it looks like the shape of the teeth on a comb. And that's what happens when you get two speakers at just the right distance from each other, so that you have, because each frequency has a different wavelength. And so you'll get these cancellations. And it depends on frequency. It depends on wavelength. There's a lot that goes into it.
And this is interesting because he said, hey, yeah, we are talking about stunt walls, which I had a feeling we were. Based on the math of comb filtering, scaling at half the rate, a lot of these stunt walls are 15 plus decibels quieter than they could be. And I believe that. I absolutely believe that because comb filtering can have a very negative effect. And part of the issue is you have a bunch of these woofers that are mid woofers, whatever, going up and down, usually in a stunt wall, right? Usually they're horizontal for each other. So we have two things that we have to worry about. One, the distance from each other this way, horizontal, and then the distance from each one, because the distance from this one is small. So we're only worried about certain frequencies there, but then from this one to the third one, now all of a sudden we got a much bigger range. So now we have to worry about different frequencies. And then we have to go back to this one and worry about these. It's a lot. There's a lot to go into making a good stunt wall. And it does make me think that if you're going to design a stunt wall like this, and I don't know, I've never designed a stunt wall. This is just theory. Okay. But if I was going to design a stunt wall, I feel like theoretically, I would want to create like a 3-foot section, of where I could try to get my comb filtering the best that I possibly could with use of DSP and worry about that 3 to 5 foot section of area, knowing that anything outside of that is going to be problematic. I don't know that there's much you can do, and maybe someone can correct me.
I want to say that I'm aware that I'm not enunciating. It's not cone filtering. It's comb, C-O-M-B filtering. So if you're saying cone filtering, it's because I'm not pronouncing it correctly. It's comb, C-O-M-B. Comb filtering.
The basic point of this is if we had two of these, I only have one right here, but if we had two of these, the distance from the center of here to the center of here is X, whatever that is. So say 5 inches, whatever. That's going to be that's going to correspond with a frequency,
right?
Whatever that frequency is, because every frequency has a wavelength. As we start to go off axis of those, we change our center to center spacing. And so we change our phasing, our phase response between the two. And because of that, typically our frequency response would be flat as we go off axis. Like with a typical TM, a good one's going to go pretty flat, and then the high end's going to go off just a little. But when we have this center to center spacing, since we're moving off axis from it, now all of a sudden the response is doing all kinds of freaky stuff, right? Some of it's going real high, some of it's going real low. It really messes up. And that's why Elliott Designs and I designed the rule breaker. The rule breaker uses 2 mid-woofers on the side and a BMR in the middle. And the reason why we use the BMR is so we could cross over real low. And by crossing over low, the distance between this and this, I think it's 100 hertz. It's so low that you don't get those comb filtering issues like you normally would. And that's obviously one of the ways to try to combat comb filtering is to try to minimize, and when I say minimize that, maybe crossover lower. Do something like compression coaxials in the middle that Jeff Schneider can get, right? Like some BNC compression coaxials in the middle. And then you worry less about it except from top to bottom. And then put woofers on the side, mid woofers that can cross over now at 300 hertz. And you don't have to worry about that comb filtering. And then put your subwoofers on the far outside or vice versa, where now you're worrying less and less about comb filtering. I think that would be an interesting way to go about it. And I don't know if it would work.
Breaking up on my end.
Yeah, and I don't know if that would work, but I think it would be an interesting go if someone was interested in trying that.
All right, am I back? I was breaking up.
You're back. You're back, man.
All right. Other thing about comb filtering that's interesting. Let me know if you can hear me or not down in the chat, because Nick is now frozen on my end.
We can hear you.
Okay, so you ever been to a concert and you've noticed those huge stacks, they hang from the ceiling and they kind of curve as they come down from the ceiling? You know what I'm talking about?
We lost Justin again.
Oh,
you're there. Yeah. So no, I'm not sure what you're talking about. Oh, we lost him again. Okay. Well, while he works on that, maybe he'll shut off his video and that'll help. Does time alignment help with comb filtering? So no, it doesn't. Yes, it does, and no, it doesn't. The problem isn't the time alignment, because the time alignment, if you're directly in front, is perfect. The problem with the time alignment is when you go off center, right? So when you go off center. So if you had a typical MTM speaker, which is a midwoofer, a tweeter, and a midwoofer, for example, they're designed to stand upright so that you get great coverage this way. But when you go this way, up and down on it, you're changing the angle at which the center point is between these two midwoofers. And so that's the issue. So even though we're time aligned perfectly directly in front of it, when we move at certain angles off axis, we've changed the angle of this. So when you see a center channel speaker, for example, and it's a midwoofer, a tweeter, and a midwoofer, unless they're crossing over very, very low, anyone sitting off to the side is going to have a really hard time hearing it. They're not hearing the same as they are hearing directly in front. And that's always been the problem with a typical center channel speaker. And so that's going to be the same with a stunt wall. If you have a center, like a tweeter here and two mids on either side, and you're crossing over, 800, 900, 1500 hertz, you're going to have that cancellation when you go off to the side, and it will affect your SPL. Justin, did you want to say that?
Yeah, I've just cut off my camera with the hopes it'll help my connectivity problems. Not sure if y'all can hear me or not.
Yep, we can hear you.
Excellent. So what I was saying before, it's kind of funny, y'all, man. You sound like a robot talking. I kind of hear about every other syllable. In concerts, they will have those big giant stacks they hang from the ceiling that kind of curve as they work their way down. What typically happens with those is they're all aimed at a different place inside the arena, and then they are delayed so that the sound is hitting the audience all at the exact same time. And so even though I think a lot of live concerts sound terrible, they're able to get around some of this comb filtering problems. Comb filtering, I'll say that again because I'm not enunciating. So I think I'm back. Am I back?
Yep, you're good. And now the way those work too, they're a little bit different. Those are called CBT line arrays, which stands for constant beam width transducer. The guy who designed these is Don Keel. And Don Keel actually has a very specific design for this. And it's actually patented. JBL owns the patent. So technically no one else can really produce the CBT line array. But the center speakers are playing at 0 decibels. And then the next part of that array plays at -3 decibels. And the next part of that array plays at -6, then -9, and then -12. So they keep going down. And they're designed on an arc. He actually designed that off of sonar from the Navy. believe it or not. It's really neat. If you go look into it, just take a look at Don Keel CBT line arrays, the types of line arrays that he has done and the concept that works. It's pretty amazing. And he gets a very, very wide dispersion because of that. And also because of the way that he does it, he actually does not worry about the typical things that we're talking about as far as your I'm losing my mind and my thought process. So yeah, look up CBT line array. You don't have to worry nearly as much about comb filtering. It's pretty interesting. It's declassified. I hope so. I hope it's declassified.
All right. Here is a question for you from Space Ghost Debase Ghost. I like that username. When I'm running a 2-battery setup, like a primary battery up front and a second battery or lithium bank in the rear, do I have to run an isolator or should I run a second alternator? So this is one that people love to debate. So what do you think, Nick? You have an idea?
No, I was laughing at David versus Goliath when he said Don Quixote. It's like
yes.
Don Quixote.
I thought you said great. Don Quixote when you first started mentioning it. So,
sorry,
so
Don
people
Quixote,
love to debate the do I need an isolator question. As a general rule of thumb, that isolator, just forgetting if you had lithium or whatnot, you just got an alternator up front, hopefully an aftermarket one, so you got plenty of juice, a good battery under the hood, a battery in the back for like reserve capacity. If you add an isolator, you should expect an additional voltage drop as a result of adding the isolator. But if you add the isolator, you don't have to worry about the car audio battery draining your starting battery. And so what I like to say, if you plan on just sitting in a parking lot with the car off and pounding away and enjoying your music, then you want an isolator because that way you can start the car. But if you're planning on driving the car, listening to music, sitting with the car running, listening to music, then you don't really need that isolator.
That makes sense.
Other things to consider, if you're running a second battery, make sure that you've got a fuse within a foot or 18 inches of both batteries. People sometimes forget about that. They think, oh, I got the battery under the hood or the fuse under the hood. That's fine. That'll protect whatever. No, you're trying to protect that wire running from front to back. You don't want that wire to get cut, cause a fire. I've known of people who have had that problem. So,
and that should go between the battery and then whatever your other device is.
Really, you need a fuse near anything that could potentially provide a power, any power source like a battery or an alternator. You need a fuse.
Right. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And again, if you want to be loud, you don't really need that isolator because you will increase your voltage drops sometimes much as a half a volt going from front to back and adding that isolator. So that's the school of thought. People love to debate on that one. I don't know. You have to. It's kind of a personal decision. Basedad had a good comment. Isolators are good for battery banks that rest at a higher voltage than the rest of the system. That's something to consider as well. I've seen people have a high voltage alternator, high output, and turn the voltage up, and then have a system to step voltage down from 16 volts down to 12, 14 volts. So the car electronics get complicated in a hurry.
That sounds good. And that is really one of the primary things is, and we were talking about that with someone else, and I can't remember who it was, or maybe I was talking behind the scenes with someone, I can't remember, but that there are certain things that can take higher voltage and other things that cannot. And you got to be careful with that too.
Right. I mean, you can find YouTube videos of this where people will try a high voltage connection to something not designed for it. Let's put 110 volts into this thing designed for 60 or something. And things run faster. Like, so do you want your fuel pump running faster by running higher voltage? Is that something your car that would actually be good for your car?
Like kids' power wheels. You ever seen that? Like, people take kids' power wheels that run a 12 volt and give them like 48 volt. They run really good for the first 30 seconds.
Yes, the people who hot rod the power wheels.
Yeah. Unless you upgrade your motors. So I want to clarify a few things from what we were talking about earlier with comb filtering. 898 Dofo said, so in short, if possible, have each woofer in their individual enclosures so comb filtering can't happen. That does not affect it at all. It's just the distance they are from each other. If they're playing the same frequency, whatever that distance, if for example, it's 10 hertz, then they have to be feet apart, like feet apart. But if we're talking like 5 kilohertz, we're talking inches apart. If they're more than that inches apart, you're going to have comb filtering, whether they're in the same boxes or
and that's
two
something,
separate boxes.
It's a really good question. I'm glad that it was asked because I do see that confusion a lot. Comb filtering has nothing to do with what's going on inside of the enclosure. This is what's going on outside of the enclosure. And I've got various videos where I show subs in one box and people say, oh, you can't do that. And people actually made that comment, hey, it gets comb filtering. It's like, that's not what comb filtering is. A lot of people debate, should you have one chamber per subwoofer? Is it okay to have 2 subs in one chamber? It's fine to have 2 subs in one chamber.
I mean, that would make a good video to test it. What's the actual difference? Yeah, what's the difference?
Kicker did that actually.
But you shouldn't. Ideally, if you built the box correctly and they're exact same size, it shouldn't be a difference unless you're getting some type of suck out based on the dimensions of your box. Like if you're getting some type of internal wave that's canceling something.
Kicker did that. Kicker has a video where they show it, two identical boxes, but one of them one chamber, one with 2, and they had an RTA and an SPL meter and had no difference.
Well, way to ruin everyone's. Now we don't have to watch the video, I guess.
I might still make a video. I mean, I'm certain I can have a snazzier thumbnail and get more clicks. So there you go.
All right. So Dave vs. Goliath said something that I also want to clarify. He said that's what makes point source or coaxials kind of nice. So a point source would be like this. This is a point source. This is actually called the PS95. It stands for point source. The problem with point source is the size of the driver. Like this is a 3.5 inch, I think PS95 is a 3.5 inch point source. And so because of that, your off axis is going to struggle because your off axis response is directly related to the size of the driver. So one of the ways that we can get a really good summation of off axis response without worrying about comb filtering is by using a concentric driver. Now, there is a difference between a concentric and a coaxial. So, for example, I got some Polk Audio speakers right here. These are coaxial drivers. They have the tweeter in the middle with the woofer. A concentric driver looks exactly the same. ELAC uses them all the time. I have yet to find a DIY concentric driver. If someone knows of one, tell me, because I've been looking for them. The difference between a coaxial and concentric is only one thing. The tweeter's in the same place, the woofer's in the same place, but their motors are aligned so that the sound comes out at the exact same time. Now, the reason why that is so important is because when we talk about going off angle, we change in a coaxial, we change the distance, the relationship of the distance between the woofer magnet and the tweeter magnet. So if one's sitting in front of the other ones, when we go off axis, we're changing that distance. And because of that, we will have comb filtering. In a concentric driver, since these are identically placed in the same spot, when we go off axis, left, right, up, or down, guess what? We don't change that relationship. So therefore, we don't have comb filtering. So if you really, really, really want the best of the best, you're looking for a concentric driver. And like I said, I don't know of any DIY concentric drivers, but if you know of one, tell us.
And let's be clear, this is esoteric, right? This is the kinds of things people who build speakers for a living think about. This is the kind of things that Nick and I think about, right? This is a deep dive into this.
Yeah.
It really is. It's a deep dive.
It really is. And honestly, these are the things that we love telling you guys about, because these are the things I don't think you're going to find at a lot of other places where people won't go that deep into. And it's important to know, because there's so much misinformation and misconceptions about it. But once you start understanding why you get comb filtering, right? It's the distance between the two speakers, which is directly related to the wavelength, which you can find out, by the way. There's calculators to find out what the wavelength is.
Yeah, you can do the math.
What the
right?
distance is.
It's you can just Google how long is a 20 hertz wave or a 500 hertz wave.
Yeah. And if those speakers are in that range, the center to center of them, you should be fine.
Adrian asked, yo, Justin, quick question for you. Do I have too much bass if I blew up my windshield? 12 car audio bargain Ultra 10s on 24,000 watts in a 3-to-1 ratio 6th order. No, you do not have enough bass. Your windshield is too weak.
You have a cheap windshield.
That's the problem. You should have upgraded your windshield, right?
Everyone knows that. First thing you do is upgrade your windshield. Plexiglass for the win.
You know, I guess, is it possible to have too much bass?
Ask the deaf people.
What?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think if you're just here's the way I look at it. The answer is yes for me. If you're trying to get enjoyment out of it every day. So, for example, there are theaters that I've been to. My friend Robbie's one of these guys that he'll have his bass up at plus 100 and his speakers at like -10, right? So like all we feel and hear is bass, and I really never hear the movie, and it's cool, but I want to hear the movie too, right? Or the music, either one.
I have to agree with that. I do think that you want to have a good balanced sound, and it all depends what you're trying to do. If you're not going to run 12 10s and 24,000 watts unless you are just going for the big SPL, going for the number in the SPL competition, that kind of thing. So it's a different game than just listening, right? Because the average person running around with a stereo in their car is a pair of 10s or a pair of 12s. And for most people, that's plenty of bass, but there's not a thing wrong with saying, I want more.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you, DIY High Five, for the $20 super chat. And anyone that has not checked out his channel, check him out. I'm actually sending him all the parts to build Cinema 6, a pair of Cinema 6s and a pair of Audience 212s. So you'll actually get to see those builds on his channel, hopefully, and you'll also get his opinion on them. But he has some questions. And I actually have more parts to throw to him.
It looks like his channel's doing great. He's got some really good views. His last video got more views than my last video. So he's doing something right. He's doing something to draw people in.
That's awesome. I'm so happy for him. So he said, when selecting drivers for a high performance build, what aspects should you consider? Aside from frequency response and impedance, any particular TS parameters or graphs? Is there anything that you can think of before I go into anything?
No, this is you. This is a you question, because I really, I don't think of anything I do as high performance, right? Definitely not sound quality wise like you do. So, I pick out drivers based on which ones look cool. I flip through the Parts Express website or Down for Sound website and go, ooh, new Down for Sound hexacones. Those look great. That's what I want.
Yeah, I completely understand. So there are definitely different technologies that you can look for. For example, you can look at the types of materials that are used, like especially in woofers. Things like aluminum are typically going to be peakier, harder to control as far as where you cross over. You're going to need to cross over sooner so that you can handle that. The only exception to that I can really think of is the new Signature line by Dayton Audio. They did a really good job controlling the breakup of the aluminum cone, because I like the look of the aluminum cone, especially that one. That's a brushed aluminum. So they did a really good job with that. Some of the things that you can look for is the technology that goes into them. So a couple things
like ferrofluid in the tweeters, right? Like ferrofluid tweeters, that kind of thing.
Well, let's stick with woofers first of all. So the first thing that I like to check out with woofers, especially if I'm going to be trying to push them, is whether or not the leads are sewn down or not. Because if the leads aren't sewn down, then they can slap up against the cone and cause issues when it's playing. So I like to look at that. That's especially useful for subwoofers, like when you're really pushing those. I like to look for copper shortening rings. And then when I'm really looking for something with bass, there's a couple different types of technology that do good. So let me explain how. Actually, I had the PS95 here, so I'll just use this. So this is a typical woofer, right? A typical speaker. It has a magnet here. Now we have a coil that's traveling up and down. Now there's excursion of a speaker, which talks about how far it can go up and down. And basically what it's talking about is how long will it travel within that gap? Well, within a single motor system like that, that coil is only in there for a very limited amount of time. And anything that goes over or under or past that area is going to have a difference in the BL curve. Okay. And because of that, it's going to be unlinear. So there's been a couple motor designs that I really like, that if we're trying to get a lot of bass out of, that I would recommend. The new M-Mag motor by Dayton Audio is really cool. Dayton Audio didn't come up with that, but they use it. But they use multiple magnets, and the basic point is to try to keep that in the center of the magnet longer, so that we can extend that BL curve, so that we can get a higher linearity, as far as more excursion, while also maintaining our linearity. Our bass will stay the same. If we have just a normal regular motor like this, our linearity will change quite drastically if we try to really push this with bass. Another one is one that CSS Audio uses, and a couple others, called an underhung motor. It's basically the same premise, but they do it a little bit differently. But it's basically just trying to keep that coil within that magnetic field longer, so that they can extend the BL. That one will be a little unlinear in the example of like how far it goes out and in on the BL curve, but it still does a much better job. And that's one of the reasons why something like the Uglies had as much bass as they did. It was because of that. So those are a couple of the things that I look for in them. The one thing that I will say for sure, though, is that I believe that manufacturers of drivers have really failed a lot of us, because all they give you is typically frequency response and impedance, which is nice. But I would love for them to include things like distortion measurements, typical distortion measurements, things of that nature, because those are the things that really tell you where you should and shouldn't be using that driver. Oh, Blake, I do love some beefy underhung driver. I do too, man. Those beefy underhung drivers, they're nice, and they are so heavy, but they're nice.
So I want to talk about that phrase cone breakup for a second. I want to make sure that you said that, but I want to make sure we define it so we know what it is. My understanding is that if here's this is a Dayton Audio 5 1/4 inch aluminum cone. So I picked a big aluminum cone mid bass. This is one of their ND series. I think it uses a neodymium magnet. And if I can zoom in on this
isn't going to have as bad, because this is more considered a full range driver. But yeah, let's look at it.
So cone breakup is what you get. So on this plot right here, everything below 1,000 hertz is really flat, right? And it's okay till about 2,000 hertz. And above 2,000 hertz, if you look at the black line, that's the on-axis line. It has this peak, then this massive dip, and then this ugly peak right at 10,000 hertz. And of course, nothing much above 10,000 hertz. Well, basically, cone breakup is where that happens, where at those upper frequencies, things start to go haywire. And this one isn't that bad for the driver of its size.
Well, and honestly, I would want to tame, like if I was using this particular driver as a mid-range, right? Say I wanted to cross it over at 3,500 hertz. Well, you're going to have an issue crossing this over at 3,500 hertz. So maybe I want to use some type of ribbon tweeter or something. I'm like, all right, I want to cross over around 3,500 hertz with this. You're going to have an issue with that. And that's because of that bump right there at 4,500 to 5 kilohertz. If you want to tame that, right? Because even if we can get that down with our crossover in the 3,500, we're going to have the crossover is going to start to go down, and then we're going to have this dip here. And if you put this in something like XSIM, for example, and just kind of model it, what you're going to notice is that you have 3 lines in XSIM, one of the tweeter, one of the woofer, and one of the combined response. What you'll notice with that combined response is it will not be linear with the tweeter response or the woofer response. The tweeter response will start going like this, and then you'll see a bump there in the combined response. And that's because it's caused by that breakup right there. So the typical point is you want to cross over like an octave below your breakup. So if your breakup happens at 5 kilohertz, then you want to cross over by 2,500 kilohertz, depending on how bad it is. Obviously. But you're right. I mean, it can really affect where you cross over when you're talking about that. And that's the same with car audio too, if you're going for sound quality in car audio.
In a perfect world, you would have a mid-range driver like this that would start to taper off at 2,000 hertz and not have much output by the time you got to 10,000. And then it would be stupid easy to design a crossover for it. But this isn't. It has that peak at 5,000, right? And that's the cone breakup where you get these oddball peaks and valleys in the upper frequencies.
Yeah.
This is not a question, but I wanted to help Brian out and help Brian learn what BL means. Do you know what BL means?
I don't know what BL means, but it's the measurement of the motor strength of a speaker is what it is.
Good. My understanding is the L in BL is literally stands for length. And so if you look at a voice coil, how long a voice coil is. And so this is basically a measure of how long the voice coil is going to stay inside of the magnetic field.
Well, that makes sense.
So it's a way of expressing how strong the magnetic field is on a speaker.
So what BL by itself doesn't tell you a lot, because in order to increase your BL, we just need to increase your resistance or your impedance. So if we have an 8 ohm speaker, guess what? Your BL will be higher. If we have a 4 ohm, your BL will be lower. There's a direct relationship to that. So in order to find your true motor strength, so how strong the motor of a lot of people ask that, how strong is my motor, my subwoofer? People will point to the BL. That's not the way you do it. You take your BL and you divide it by your RE, which is your resting impedance. Okay. So your RE. Right. If you divide those together, that will give your motor strength. Exactly. Your DC resistance. So if you divide those two, you'll get your motor strength. So if you're looking for a subwoofer with the strongest motor, take your BL, divide it by the RE, and see what you get. And you got to be careful with car audio, because car audio will often have multiple, like dual. Why can I not? Oh, yeah, dual voice coil.
Yeah,
I don't know I need more of this Mountain Dew. All right, they'll have dual voice coil, and you have to take a look at their measurements, right? So they'll give you their TS measurements sometimes, and they'll say the BL. You have to find out what they measured that at. Did they measure that BL at 4 ohm? Did they measure it at 1 ohm? Did they measure it at 8 ohm? Because if you don't know, you can't guess. You have to know what they measured it at.
So is this correct? Is it BL squared divided by RE?
It is.
Right.
But isn't that what I said?
I think you just said BL divided by RE, but that's okay. We're all friends here. We know what you we knew what you were trying to explain.
It's possible.
And I really think BL, if you actually look in the stats, it's BL product, right? So it's B times L is how you calculate BL. I don't know where the hell you get B from, but I know what the L is. And there's some really great B stands for magnetic flux distance, the L stands for the length of the wire in the magnetic gap. Multiply 2 to get BL. And David versus Goliath had a great one to add to. This is a great thing about having people in the community that are as knowledgeable as David and as Blake, because they can fill in the gaps and we don't know them. So this is cool. I enjoyed this a lot. The curve, the BL curve, is directly proportional to X max and X mech. BL follows a curve. So that's the thing to consider too. As you get further away, right, as the cone pushes out more and more, the BL goes down, it gets weaker. So it's harder to push the cone out a long way. And I've seen this happen in some of my videos. I've taken crappy subwoofers and thrown a big amp on them to see what would happen, and they're not any louder than if I had half the power, because it's going nowhere. I've driven it out too far. It's not doing any good to keep throwing power to it.
So let's explain why that's important. Your TS parameters changed based off that.
Yeah.
So your tuning frequency can change off of that. So if you're one of these guys that wants to give it significant amount of power, right? You could actually change like how the subwoofer performs inside the box that you've designed it for. So Aaron's Audio Corner used to do speakers, and it was kind of funny because you could see some speakers where the BL curve, like we have a center line, right? It's resting position. That's the center line. And then you have it in and an out. So this is it going in and this is it going out. And it would look like a really sharp smiley face, meaning you don't get much
Right.
X max before you break that. And I can't remember what percentage. It's either 1 or 10%, something of that nature. And then you have other ones that use better motors where that BL curve is much, much longer. And I would love to see more manufacturers of speakers provide clipple data. I noticed that Dayton has started to do that with some of their products, and I really appreciate that because that allows you to know how much you can really push the speaker and stay within those measurements. I was talking to Aaron, and it was kind of funny because depending on how much power you give a driver, especially with a bad motor structure, can change the tuning frequency significantly. So to where you wouldn't even imagine that it was the same speaker in the same box.
I saw a post on Facebook the other day. Down for Sound is actually renting out time with a clipple to test the speakers, their store brand speakers they're developing, those hexacones. And that's, I don't know how much they're doing, prototype, let's test it, or if they're just testing what they've got to verify that it is as designed. And I find that interesting because I feel like there are a lot of huge companies out there that could afford to pay for rental time on a clipple or even afford one that aren't doing it, aren't giving us this data.
Well, and here's the other thing. A lot of these could afford a clipple. It's not like they're that crazy expensive for a company, right?
Exactly.
I mean, what are they? They're right around $100,000.
Right, yeah. That's my understanding is they're $100,000. But what's $100,000 to a huge company?
Right, that's not astronomical. I mean, when we're talking about businesses as big as someone like Sundown or some of these other businesses, Pioneer, Klipsch, whoever. I mean, that's
at this point we're talking about how many people are riding around in F-250s that are cost $100,000 when they probably should have bought a clipple instead.
That's actually pretty funny. I would love a clipple. Yeah.
I mean, I will have a clipple before I have $100,000 pickup truck. I mean, that's
me too. I agree. No, and I think you're right. I mean, a clipple is far more useful to the stuff that we do.
Yes. Now, wouldn't mind having the nice pickup truck so I can have a big stereo in it, but I'll have a clipple before. I mean, really, you got a nice big show truck to promote your brand. You could have bought a clipple instead and given people data.
Yeah. And I think the data, that type of data is better for us to know whether a speaker is good or bad. One of the reasons why I really appreciated what Eminence did with their tech stream driver. With their tech stream driver, they showed the waterfall graph, which a lot of people don't do. And it showed it to be an excellent performer. And then when I listened to it, it just confirmed what they're showing on the graph. It's just a very beautiful sounding driver that doesn't really have any harshness in it.
Maybe brands don't want to show you waterfall charts and results from a clipple. Maybe they don't want you to know what's going on.
It's true. Although I did talk to one of the designers of speakers and said, "Hey, look, I could make my response always flat if I wanted to, but I would dampen it so much you'd lose dynamics." And I found that to be very interesting as well.
There we go. All right. Do we have any more questions in our starred questions, Nick?
What brands do you, well, I wanted to answer this if you don't mind. Do you know any that are publishing clipple data? I know a couple, but
I don't. You seem to be more up on what the data out there is. So you're more the data guy in this context.
Well, I mean, Aaron's Audio Corner, first of all, does a great job doing clipple data on speaker, like already performed speakers. He doesn't do individual drivers anymore. Some of the brands that I know of, I know Cartesian was doing it. They were doing a really good job with it. Dayton Audio is starting to do it on some of theirs. And those are really the only two that I can think of that I can think of off the top of my head. They're doing it. There's probably others, but didn't you say Sundown's starting to do it now?
Down for sound. I don't know if they're going to publish
Oh,
the
down for
data,
sound.
but I know they're testing. Right, they're going through the trouble to do that with their drivers are coming out with.
But see,
Which
like
is really
that's the
impressive
problem.
because
That
they're
data
not
needs
that
to.
big of a company in regards to this game, right? I mean, they're a much bigger outfits, but they're going to go through the trouble to go ahead and rent time on a clipple. So,
Do you mind if I answer this?
go for it.
Does the average consumer know how to interpret clipple data, though? That's the problem. That I've talked to some of the people in industry, and that's one of the things that they've said is, I just don't know that people will understand it. But I think that's a terrible excuse, because who cares? When the first time we put frequency response data out there, people didn't understand how to interpret that either. So what? People will learn. Who cares?
And I can imagine if you're in Stu's situation, working in a shop building boxes. A lot of times the customer walks in and they just are like, I don't know anything. I just want something that sounds good. And well, people like Stu need to have access to the data so they can say, hey, Mr. or Miss Customer, I know what sounds good. I've got data. I've got experience. Let me, just give me a big fat check and I'll make it sound good. Just hand me the money and we'll get to work. Right.
I agree. And I agree with Phi Mobile Sounds. It says, hey, look, some people in this chat wouldn't mind learning, and you don't know what you're not exposed to. And I agree. And I will say this, I have quite a few videos on my channel where we talk about those things. I sat down with one of the guys from Dayton Audio that talked about some extensive clipple measurements. My one on what is that? The new multiple mag by Dayton Audio. Why can I not think of that?
What is that now?
The new multiple magnet, the Epic driver.
Yeah.
If you look at, I sat down with Chris Perez and we talked about that. And I also sat down with Cartesian and we also talked about the clipple measurements. So if you want to learn a little bit about clipple measurements, watch the Epic video that I did with Chris Perez. I sat down with him, and then watch the Cartesian video where I sat down with the owner of Cartesian. I think those would at least start getting your feet wet.
Nick, I'd like to know your answer to this question. I have my thoughts on it, and I'd like to know yours.
I want to hear yours first because I've been talking too much.
I do not recommend mixing box types or putting two subwoofers with different tuning frequencies, two ported boxes. I don't recommend mixing speaker sizes. I don't recommend mixing brands. If you're going to have two subwoofers, match them. I'm a big believer in matching them. And I say that knowing that I don't have any proof that I'm right when I say that. And I get questions like this a whole lot. Questions like, what would happen if I had a sealed and a ported together? What would happen if I had two ported subwoofers, both tuned to different frequencies? Because people are hunting for a way to get, hey, I want it to sound good at every frequency. And that's kind of where I feel like this is probably coming from. Is there some advantage to mixing and matching these? And my opinion is no, but I don't have any proof to back up my opinion.
I think you do more harm than good most of the time.
I think you're going to run into phasing problems is what I think.
Yeah. Your group delay is going to be different on both. So we're going to have issues with our group delay. And then not only that, we also have the issue of cabin gain, right? I'm going to assume, first of all, that we're talking about a vehicle because we're looking at a vehicle in this picture. Right. So cabin gain is, of course, the amount of low end extension that you gain based off the wavelength of the length of your vehicle and the wavelength that it's associated to. So everything basically at that wavelength and below, you'll gain. And I did a video on that actually too. But actually, did you do a video on that too?
I was reading a comment.
Cabin gain.
Cabin
gain. Cabin gain.
I do not have a video on cabin gain.
Okay. Well, I do. Then you can watch that one. It's on why go sealed? Why don't we do more large sealed subwoofers? And the basic premise is that, yeah, that's a good point too. It will affect the impedance curves as well. The impedance curves will also be affected because of that.
Yep.
I don't think it's a good idea. Overall, I don't think it's a good idea.
Here's somebody with some experience. Matching is easiest. I've done a lot of, I love this word,
Stuff.
way harder to get it right.
Testing.
It can be done, but it takes a monumental amount of work and patience and know-how. And that's kind of what I think. I think that's right, because it can be done, I guess. I'm sure there's some situation where through some magic you could probably do it. Now, if you're talking about, maybe I want to do, some 8-inch drivers for mid bass and some 12s ported or sealed to get down low, and you want to try to tinker with crossovers and stuff, maybe you try that. But just, hey, let's do a sealed enclosure because it gives me the tight bass, and a ported enclosure for the low bass, that doesn't really work.
Yeah, it sounds good in theory, but we know that bass waves will interact, especially in a vehicle. And they're going to
Right.
interact negatively. And now, especially if because in the first one, and I didn't even think about impedance, so I'm glad that Stu said that. If you are hooking it up to a mono amp, you are also going to have issues with that impedance. So overall, just not a great idea, I don't think. But you know what I always say, and I think Justin says the same thing: test it and find out. Maybe you like it. It's not gonna. We don't think it's a great idea, but you're welcome to try it. And we're not going to think anything differently of you either way.
And Bass Dad's got it right. I don't think it'll work, but you try it, and who knows, maybe it'll work.
We were talking about earlier the problem with multiple speakers playing multiple same frequencies and the wavelengths and comb filtering because of that. And I think you're going to see a lot of interaction with those waves in a negative way. Oh, another super chat.
On a budget, spend the money on the amp or spend the money on amp, cheaper speakers. So I'm of the opinion that as long as the amplifier is functioning within its intended range and functioning properly, that it's not just a complete garbage amp that never has a chance, that the amp makes very little difference. Two 50-watt amplifiers with the gain set properly are both going to give you 50 watts. And unless there's something wrong with one of them, I've got one on order that I'm going to do a test that I suspect has something wrong with it. But as long as the amps are functioning properly and they work, 2 amps should sound the same. People like to debate on that. I need to make a video on that, actually. So if it were me, I would put my money into better speakers before I would put my money into a bigger or better amplifier.
So there's a couple things that I'm going to say about this. One, first of all, it does depend, I think, on the quality of amplifier you're buying. So, there are some real cheap bad amps. I'll admit that are noisy, have noisy output stages that aren't linear. Those ones I would stay away from. Now, here's what I would say to this. If you spend your money on a good quality amplifier with high output that you can use for years and years and years to come, that will last you maybe the rest of the time you're in audio. Speakers, on the other hand, usually will not.
That's fair.
You're replacing them often. So I don't think there's a wrong way to do it, but I personally would put more money into the amplifier, knowing that amplifier is going to make anything I put on it sound better, and also know that amplifier will last longer and last with me, assuming I spend it on a good amp.
So we're giving 2 different answers. And I
That's
guess
a good thing.
And I guess what we should do, though, is we should ask the question first, what is the goal? If you're just trying to get SPL numbers, lots of bass and thump just as loud as you can get for as cheap as possible, then you want something like a Scar Audio subwoofer, or maybe that Hyanka subwoofer, which does some pretty good value. And you just want the biggest amp you can possibly get your hands on. Stay away from Boss because their power ratings aren't accurate. But my thought was, cheap speakers versus the amp. Where I went to with that was I was thinking your mids and your highs in your car. And I'd put the money into the mids and the highs before I would put the money into the amp for the mids and the highs.
See, I would still put it into the amp first because the speakers are typically cheaper anyway.
Yeah.
But here's the deal. I know many people that have bought a home theater system. For example, I'm going to go home theater just because I think it's easier to equate. Bought a home theater speaker, have an AVR, and then they have these nice monoblock amplifiers that they bought 20 years ago, Rotel, whoever, whatever brand they bought, they're still using them to this day. How many times has their head unit or their AVR changed? Multiple times, because that's where all the technology is, right? The amplifier, there's really not a lot of new technology in the amplifier. It's just how much power and how cleanly can it output it. Speakers haven't necessarily changed a lot, but the more that we're understanding speakers has kind of changed. And so the way that manufacturers have even manufactured some speakers have changed because of that as well. But amplifiers really don't change a lot if we're just talking amplifier, not anything else built into it, just an amplifier.
So here's what for me. Here's what I'm thinking as I'm making my argument. Down in the garage, I've got a pair of Kenwood 4-channel amps, the little compact amplifiers that I ran my 3-way front stage on for several years in my truck, and I started ripping things out when I probably should have left it alone. Those amplifiers put out the same power as some little audio control amplifiers that cost 50% more, maybe 100% more, same power. And I would wager that those Kenwood amplifiers are just as good, going to last just as long. Kenwood's one of those brands that is, it does not get the credit it deserves. And so I would look at that and say the Kenwood versus the audio control. If I'm on a budget, I'm buying the Kenwood and spending the money I saved on better speakers.
Now, see, I can agree with that, because I feel like there's different classes of amplifiers, right?
Right.
In the essence, like there's cheap, there's mid-range, and then there's really, really good. So for example, in home audio, really, really good right now would be something like Purify, okay, or hypex.
Yeah.
And actually you can use hypex and Purify in vehicles as well. You can get them for those. If I was getting a Purify or hypex, I know it's going to last me for the next 20 plus years, and I'd be buying it that. But if I'm picking between two mid-ranges that output the same amount, and one is half the price than the other one, then why wouldn't you buy the one? I mean, I agree. Buy the one with half price.
Fair enough. I don't disagree with that. If you have two speakers that appear to have the exact same specs, and one's cheaper than the other, one, double check to make sure one of them's not cheaper for a reason, and two, it's okay to save money, right? Don't ever be afraid to save money. I don't buy into the buy once, cry once crowd. I just don't, because there's always a better piece of gear out there. There's always a better tool.
But
if
see,
you really believe
I'm going to argue with that for a minute.
You're just going to hemorrhage money. I mean, you just are.
But I think that's not true with amplifiers, though, because amplifier, like, that's the only place I would disagree with you. Head unit, I would agree with you. Speakers, I would speakers could go either way. But I would definitely agree with you on head unit. I definitely agree with you like a surround sound receiver, because technology changes too much. Even DSP, right? I would be like, yeah, you're right. But amplifiers, besides the topology, right? Class A, Class AB, and Class D. Yeah. A lot of it has not changed. Now, I would argue that Purify and hypex have changed the output stage to a place on Class D that makes them a step above everyone else. And there's probably some others out there as well. Orchard Audio is another one.
So I think that we're probably splitting hairs on this, which is fine. That's what we do. But we would both agree not to go get a used Radio Shack booster, as the true voice of reason has suggested. There are bad amplifiers out there. I had a company, not going to say who it was. I had tested something for them before. They sent me one of those kind of booster pack things. And when I tested it and said, hey, this thing doesn't do anywhere near the rated power, they were like, oh yeah, it's because you're supposed to run up to 10% total harmonic distortion. And I just said, we're done here. Don't ever contact me again. They insulted me. And so it's one of those things where stay away from like the bottom of the line garbage, right? I mean, stay away from that, because that is a waste of your money. But you don't have to buy the absolute best of everything in order to be happy.
You got another super chat.
I see that. Oh. we both clicked on at the same time. I'll let you get it.
Oh, you got it.
Raham, $49.99 super chat. We don't get big super chat blocks that very often. We're not living line with Andy, but we're glad to have them. I went with the Pioneer 5-channel, fantastic amplifier, 2 12-inch pile subs in the truck enclosure sealed, 2 6.5-inch planet audio, 2 planet audio 5x7 to go on the single cab truck. like that the amp can tune all channels. Figure speakers can be upgraded later, loud and clean. So that's a great amp, and definitely one that I'd recommend getting, because again, those Pioneer amps are they're undervalued. They put out great power and they sound good, and it will last a long time. The other things, I do believe that yes, you should upgrade it when you can afford to. I think you can get better gear. I would have gone, maybe, I don't know if you can get a much cheaper amp than that and still be a quality amp, but I would have leaned a little bit towards less of the amp and more of the others. But you've built a pretty good budget system with what you've got there.
I love it. And this
Yeah.
is what I'm talking about. Like, get best value. Like, there's no reason to spend $1,000 on an amplifier if you can get one for 500 that does the same thing and is the same quality.
You could have gotten a JL Audio or an Audio Control 5-channel amplifier, and then you could sit it on your desk and stare at it, because you couldn't have afforded the subs and the mids and highs. And you want to avoid doing that. And nothing against those brands. They make great stuff. But if you are trying to get by on a budget, what you did's a better option.
I like that. I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
So Stu had said that car audio and home audio are in different places, technologies in different places. And I don't know what he means by that, because amplifiers are amplifiers, but I would be interested to understand more of what he means, because it's possible that maybe I am seeing this more from a home audio side than a car audio. So, for example, there was this great article written by, I think it was Audioholics, that was like the clone of the amplifiers. And it was all these home amplifiers. Every single one of them used the exact same amplifier board from Ice Power. It's the exact same board. All of them ranged from anywhere from like $1,000 to $6,000. The only difference was the casing. It's like, that was it. And so it's like, yeah, buy the $1,000 one. You're not getting any difference in the $6,000. You're just getting the name brand. And I think that happens a lot in car audio as well.
Yeah. And again, I'm not trying to trash the high-end brands, but I mean, budgets are real things. It's perfectly fine to say, you know what, I do have a budget and I have to stick to it.
I would, if it was me and I was looking for a really nice amplifier.
You're looking for it right now. I'm going to show it.
Well, I'm trying to see if I could find it. I'm under the impression that you can use both, that Purify and hypex have modules that work in a vehicle. And I was trying to find one, and I can't find it in my quick 2-second search.
Well, as we're looking that up, I'm throwing a comment up here that yes, car audio amplifiers are moving to a smaller footprint for sure. No doubt about that, and DSP and whatnot on them. So that is a true fact for sure. As I'm trying to multitask here, I'm trying to find another window, and while you're looking that up, I want to show you this right here. Where did it go? My slow internet is biting me in the butt again.
It's so weird too, because like you said, it's not that you don't pay for good internet. It's just they don't give it to you.
I really think it's the time of day. It's the people are getting home from work and jumping online to do whatever it is they do online. Here we go. This is what I mean when I say avoid the bottom of the line brands. I have no idea what the heck this brand is, but I saw it on Amazon the other day, and I thought, yeah, I might need to buy that and test it, because I have a sneaking suspicion that this thing is not a 1,000 watt amplifier. DuPont, PONT, DuPont.
Oh yeah. Wow. So you're gonna have to tell me that's cheap.
Yeah. I mean, I if it will even turn on, I'll be impressed.
I like that.
I think this might be another one for Max Power Audio. This might be one of theirs.
So I want to share this because we're talking about car audio amplifier, just a car audio amplifier. And I don't know the cost of it. Like, is this expensive or not? So this is 1,000 watt amplifier, 250 watts by 4 for $1,000. Is that like $1 a watt? Is that expensive or no?
Did you say 250 watts by 4 for $1,000?
Yeah. So $1 a watt.
Biketronics, $1 a watt's a little high in the modern world we live in.
Because this is using all of the newest high D technology. So they are supposed to be using, if I'm not mistaken, let me double check before I say it. I can't remember if they're using hypex. Yeah, they're using hypex Encore 500, 2500. So these would be ones that are very, very low that have been supposedly considered top line. I've never heard of them either, by the way. I was just looking up what companies use hypex and Purify.
If I'm paying that much for a car audio amp, I'm buying one from a brand name I recognize.
But that's the problem. Like, they're actually using good modules, though. The problem is a lot of those higher end companies are just using recycled boards. If I understand you correctly, they're using recycled boards that they've been using for years and years and years.
Yes, that's my understanding.
maybe some new layouts and stuff, but the same basic thing. This is using the latest and the greatest. Supposedly,
I'll have to look into them. What's that called again? Yeah. Biketronics.
Everyone look into them, and you guys tell us what you think of it on the next podcast, because we want to know. It's called Titan Power by Biketronics. This is the BT4250. This is supposed to be using hypex modules. So, I believe they're using hypex. They might be using Purify, but then.
And Ben is going crazy with the super chats. Properly tuning and pairing components is key. Matching RMS in tune, not the max power, right? Based on RMS power.
That's great.
So, and Ben, thank you for all those super chats. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. We love super chats because they tell us that we're doing something right. Because people wouldn't be giving us super chats if we were wasting their time and energy. So,
and that's good information.
Yes. All right. I'm looking at the clock, Nick, and it is, we've been at it for a little over an hour. Is there anything else that you want to talk about before we wrap it up? Or did we get,
one of my patrons asked a question, and I did want to get to it because we haven't got to it yet.
Good.
And he said, maybe explain in simple terms the difference between using 110 volt AC versus 220 volt AC. And, we talked about this before the show a little, but why don't you tell me? Why don't you go ahead and take it?
Make sure I got the formula right. I just suddenly thought I know the formula. I was about to say it and then thought maybe I don't know it. Watts equals volts times amps. And so if you're thinking about home audio, whether it's I don't know, are there any 220 amplifiers out there? Is that a thing for home audio? I'm sure there are. Like, there's probably a pro amp or something like that. So if you're
I have a 220 volt amp.
Gotcha.
At the house right now. Yeah.
So your typical household circuit is either going to be a 15 or a 20 amp circuit, and at 110 volts, 20 times 110, what is that? A little over 2,000 watts is the most power you can run down your wires inside your home safely, which means after efficiency losses, heat losses, there is a practical limit to how much power your home amplifier can put out, probably close to 1,000 watts on a 20 amp circuit. But if you've got a 220 volt circuit, most of those are actually rated for lower amperage. You got more voltage, more power. So that's why your drying machine and your stove and stuff like that are going to be on 220. If you're welding out in the garage, you need a 220. You can just get more power down a 220 line.
Yeah, and in general, using less amperage should, in theory, also run cooler. But in general, you're usually just using it on higher wattage stuff. So table saws, like, for example, I have a really nice table saw that I can't remember how many horsepower the motor is. It runs off 220. My CNC runs off 220 because I can run a bigger spindle off of that and not have to worry about using as much amperage. I could run a lot off of that 220 if I really wanted to.
Yeah, all I've got is 110 out in the garage, so I'm limited to that. And so, it's just life. There you go.
Yeah. All right. That's it. That's all I had. What about you?
What have you got coming up next, Nick?
So I have this really cool. Now they say it out loud, everyone's like, "Wait, what?" I have this really cool remote control that I'm going to be reviewing, actually, which is kind of neat because it does things like macro
Oh,
assignments where
cool.
you can use it to press a button and then it does like 17 functions for you, just bloop, and you're good. It works off IR, Bluetooth, and some RF as well. It's pretty cool, but it can actually control things like my new Vivid Storm screen that when I press a button, it turns on, it goes, and it rises and it turns the projector on, and it'll do everything for you. And there's been a real hole in the market ever since Harmony left. So that'll be pretty cool. Also have, believe it or not, a which I swore I was never going to review one again, but I'm going to review a sound bar. And it's actually kind of intrigued me. I have not listened to it yet, so I have no idea about it. So don't ask me how good it is because I don't know yet. Those types of things. But I would really highly, highly, highly recommend anyone to watch the newest video I put out on this projector. It's a pretty cool projector. Even if you're not interested in video or anything, I compared it to my JVC projector, which is about 8 years old. So you don't expect technology to change significantly in that time. But if you look at the difference, I've actually compared them head to head, and the JVC was not cheap. It was a very expensive projector. So when you look at them head to head, it's just amazing. And I think if you just watch that, even if you're not interested in buying anything or buying the projector or anything, I just think it's pretty cool to see how far technology has gone and what you can get nowadays. It's just really, it's really neat to me.
Indeed,
I just think
indeed.
it's really
So, I just dropped a video where I used some of those cool Jag 35 bus bars to put together some lithium headway cells. I like the way it turned out. Reading some of the comments, I decided I need to buy a new power supply. So the ones already ordered, my power supply was misbehaving. So as far as what's coming up next on the channel, hopefully the video where I have the full story behind this picture is going to be up next week. And so I'll be sending some behind the scenes pictures out to my patrons as always. And if I get the video done before the weekend, it'll go up to my patrons first as always. So that's what I've got coming up next on my channel. So I think that is it. And so we'll do a Q&A show again. So like, save your questions and we'll try to answer them. We'll try to answer the question about will Toy ever build a transmission line subwoofer for home theater use? And we'll try to catch that next time.